there tonight with our MiWeek contributors, Nolan Finley of the Detroit News and Stephen Henderson of the Detroit Free Press. Guys, when I heard this news, I just felt sick. I felt sick to my stomach.
Well, that's the first time you've heard it.
No, it's not the first time you've heard it, but I don't know. But when you say a roundup of 12 principals, former and current, you're not talking about one person.
No, and people. It is. But still, I mean, how long ago did you cover Detroit Public
20
Schools?
years ago, and most of my stories were about stuff like this.
Yeah, these same sort of kickback schemes. This is where a good chunk of the $2 billion in bond money that was supposed to fix these schools went over the last 20 years. But the timing could not be worse as the legislature considers this debt payoff package and restructuring of the schools. You know, the question up there has been how much oversight do we put on this money? And the city, the schools have resisted a good deal of oversight from the state, and rightfully so. The state's been a mess the last 5 or 6 years as well. But I think this complicates the whole task of getting this debt repayment passed.
All right, before we even get to Lansing and what they think about this, and it is another, not excuse, but another mark in the column of, well, I'm not quite sure if I want to help out DPS. I mean, how did we even get there in the first place that we have these principals who are doing this? Well, allegedly.
And again, if I go back to 22 years ago when I was covering the district, this was the kind of activity that was not just sort of one or two principals, but I mean it's just sort of part of the system, and it's the way things got done. You know, I could go back and pull clips with my name on them that detail stories that are very similar to what we saw this week, and we just have not been able in the city to get past that kind of pay-to-play control and dynamic in government. And it's not just schools. I mean, you look around, there are lots of places that takes place. I mean, I've always had a hard time understanding why someone would do this in a school. I mean, I think that there ought to be a moral sort of barrier there for people to say, look, I'm in charge of education in these kids, I'm not going to do this. But I also think that a lot of these people would tell you this is how stuff gets done in the district, and as individuals, they don't feel like they can push back.
Though?
Well, I mean, the culture like this grows up because people think they can get away with it, and why they think they can get away with it has always been curious to me, because over the years we've seen indictment after indictment after indictment, and people still try this same scheme. You know, the vendors, the contractors, they're greasing palms, and it starts out small. And you know, when they rounded up those folks at the EAA just a few months ago for this very same thing, the one woman said, well, you know, everybody does this. This is how I grew up.
I learned it from the other
principals. From the other principals. This is how they told me how to do it. Now, I thought it was interesting. There was a quote, I believe, and it was the Free Press, from a teacher reacting to this. And she said, quote, "It's pitiful that they're going after principals who are probably just doing what they need to do, even if it might be a little bit unethical, in order to provide the students in their schools with the supplies and the materials they need. The district and the state should be providing us." So, but how do you then get over that mindset of, well, it's, you know, it's not right, it's unethical, but they're just doing what they need to do?
Again, I mean, this is a system where people are accustomed to dealing with incredibly trying and difficult conditions over a long period of time, where there is never enough to do the job you're supposed to do. I mean, there's not enough money in the schools to provide the things that the kids need. And then I think you get people who are just sort of susceptible to the idea that, okay, well, this is the way, again, this is the way things work, and this is the way to make things work, and so I'm just going to go along with it.
There's no noble characteristics here. I mean, in one case, they were $5 million, $2 million ended up in the pockets of these folks. You can't say, well, gosh, they were just looking out for the kids. They were looking out for themselves.
Yeah, when they're saying that some of the supplies weren't even delivered.
That was supposed to go for the supplies. It wasn't people cutting corners or doing sort of shady things to get kids supplies. They were putting the money in their own
pockets, sure.
All right, so let me go back to the bottom line question of how do you change this culture then? How do you, in this renewed era of, okay, there's going to be a new DPS, there's going to be a new way of doing things, how does this change?
I don't know.
I don't think it does. I mean, this is the culture of a district. It's a very large district. You could change the person at the top. It's like any other huge organization. Changing a culture is extremely hard, whether it's an auto company or a governmental unit. And I think you change it by putting by calling people to account, by putting people in jail and making the cost of taking these bribes and kickbacks too high to risk.
So then let's then take the pathway up to Lansing. So now if you've got lawmakers who are looking at this, and Nolan brought up the point originally when he first started talking, how does this play now in the legislature?
Well, it provides a really convenient excuse for people who didn't want to do the right thing anyway to now hang that on something that people in Detroit did, as opposed to the fact that the state is responsible for the debt that they're trying to forgive right now. I mean, everyone's got to sort of keep their eye on the ball. If you don't do this, if you don't take care of this debt, it doesn't come to the people in the city of Detroit. It belongs to the state, and you'll pay more later if you don't do it now. And so, I mean, I think the governor and the leaders in the legislature have got to make that clear. There is not a choice here, and what is going on with this scandal is actually not related to what they're debating. Now, what the system looks like going forward and what kind of controls you want to put in, those are legitimate debates that we're going to have anyway. But this does not change, it doesn't change the facts on the ground in terms of what needs to be done.
It doesn't change what needs to be done, but it certainly makes a strong case that the folks in the House had been making, that this money's got to come with more oversight. There's got to be more controls put on this money. You're not going to get the votes to send that kind of money into Detroit without oversight, particularly in light of this scandal, because you're going to have taxpayers up there saying, well, gosh, we're sending all this money up there, and they're going to stuff it in their pockets.
Well,
I think they've earned that themselves.
Financial oversight's one thing. They are venturing into other things, though. They want to tell the district how to manage union negotiations, for instance. That doesn't have anything to do with this, and that's not the state's business, quite frankly. I mean, there's an overreach, of course, because it's politics that's sort of afoot here, and this could be used as predicate for it, but it's not legitimate.
It's a state business in the sense that if the district ends up in the same sort of financial trouble again, is the state going to write another check to wipe out the debt? I think financial oversight in all areas is appropriate until this district gets the sort of leadership in place that can run it in a professional, competent, efficient way. And that's defied.
And you guys say, well, you know what, how do you even change the culture of this too? My question is now, are we going to be seeing more charges? Are we going to be seeing more principals or more?
I think that's a question for Barbara McQuaid. You know, does she think that this was a discrete number of people involved in a very specific scheme, or is it the tip of the iceberg and indicative of a much wider pattern of practice? I don't know that. I haven't heard her address that, and she probably wouldn't tip her hand anyway. But you know, I mean, if you look at the pattern of her office, I mean, she has not gone after small kinds of stuff in this regard. It's usually pretty big. So.
All right. Well.